Oh, Steve, you figured out that you're
I
good
figured out
things.
what? I couldn't hear you over the mic noise. I'm sorry. I figured out what?
I said, "Oh, you figured out that your fly was open." Oh well, all good
Oh,
things.
is it? Oh, I didn't know I was wearing pants today, so
Well,
good to know.
I put out that we were trying to fix this whole awkward opener. You know, the whole
Yeah, I read
we
that.
open up
We didn't
the show
succeed.
without really any kind of tagline or any kind of slogan that would stick. So I put out on Twitter for people to send suggestions and ideas of things that we could open up the show with, and the most liked one would win, and that was the most liked one. Your fly's open. So
Yeah,
I don't know how to read into that, but that's what it is. How are you doing, Steve?
I wouldn't know where to go with that either because, like I said, half the time I'm not wearing pants for this. So
How are you doing,
no,
Steve?
just kidding. I am wearing. Look at I can't stretch my legs that much. You're gonna have to just take my word for it. I am wearing pants today.
Excellent. Excellent.
I
All
can't
right.
speak for Kyle.
Joining us today, we'll say hello to these two gentlemen real quick. Dr. Bowen, how are you, sir?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Excellent.
I'm excellent. Fabulous. Hope you are. And joining the show for the first time, Mischa Popoff. Hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
Excellent. We'll get a couple things out of the way, and then we'll jump into what we're going to be talking about tonight. I just have a couple of things. Wednesday, on the 21st, that's this Wednesday, Miles Powers will be with us. He will be coming to talk about the protocol with Jilly Juice. He actually tried the cabbage concoction. Braver man than I, but I can't wait to hear how that went. Black Friday is this Friday. Do you guys go out shopping for Black Friday?
No, you have to take your life in your hands when you do that.
Yeah,
but you got to remember, I did retail for 20 years. So do you know how many Black Fridays I've had to do? Why would I want to go shopping on Black Friday? I can actually sleep.
Dr. Bowen,
all on the internet.
No, I definitely don't. I don't like shopping that much.
And Mischa, you don't go out?
No, my wife goes online. I wonder, why would anyone line up at the store when most of the Black Friday stuff is available online now, and yet there's this mad rush. It's just crazy.
I'll tell you why, because I'm one of those people. I am in line every year at one of these places, and it's the thrill of the hunt. You want to be. I love getting in the middle of it and going after and getting those deals. I got a TV last year. I think it was a 50-inch, but it was $199, and there was like 3 of them left. And I remember doing kind of like a shimmy, like just a stiff arm or a fake out to get that last ticket. And I felt bad for a second, like a split second, but it quickly went away when I got home and put the TV up and watched it. All the guilt left me. So yeah,
it's fair game.
Yeah, I agree. Although it's funny, every year we do this, I see at least one example of 2 fathers that are in the kids stuff is really, really, really brutal. Like the competition to go out and get like the play sets or whatever that they have going out. And every year there's at least 2 dads that are having like a full blown out wrestling match over who's going to get that last one. So I'm glad that for that I don't have kids, because that would be me. I'd probably be in all kind of, I'd be locked up on Black Friday. Let's be real. But I can't wait for this year because I'm going after an Apple Watch. That's this year's checklist thing. Even though I don't really need it, I just want one. So, why did I bring up Black Friday? Oh yeah, Black Friday. For here though, Black Friday we will be joined by what's his name, Dr. Bowen?
And Angelus Domini.
Yes. Can you kind of explain real quick who that is?
Yeah, I can try. So there's a, can we call it a cult? Is that what we should call it? There's a movement.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Called the International Congregation of Lord Rael. and Rael is proclaims himself to be the Messiah, and of course I don't agree. But he has quite a movement, I guess, relatively speaking, on Facebook and on something called VK. And I've interacted with them a little bit, and we did a show on them a month ago, maybe. And I guess they didn't like it, which is great. And he has offered to come on and answer questions, I suppose, that we put to them. But Angelus Domini, the angel of our Lord, is he's the emissary of Rael, and he does a lot of the public speaking for him. And so yeah, I mean, I'm excited.
Excellent. I am too.
We could
I can't
tell.
wait.
One Messiah to another, I guess.
I just want to say real quick, David McGinnis, I love you, man, but even I can't stomach anyone insulting the Great Apple. So take these couple of seconds and just think about what you said, and hopefully you'll come back and come around. You know what I mean?
5 minutes of penance for your breach of your heretical things there, David. And by the way, you're a Messiah, but I am officially the Pope of agnosticism, so maybe I could be somebody's vicar for that. So
no,
I
nobody's
mean,
gonna.
I don't know if it means anything, Steve, but I mean, I went back and checked just to make sure, and in the Torah code, you're Yahweh, so.
Yeah, so so wait a minute. So I'm Yahweh and I'm the Pope of agnosticism. I think there's a problem there. I think there's some kind of contradiction, but I'll work on that one.
Oh, anyways, okay.
Very existential problems here.
For just two more things to get through, and then we're going to jump into the discussion. I love you, David McInnes. I actually, when I timed you out, I thought it would give me a choice. I didn't know it would go for 300 seconds, so it's a little bit longer than you need to think about what's going on. But really. It was a joke. But yeah, on Saturday, Saturday Night Fights, we will be having another round. This one's going to be extremely interesting because we have a guy that owns the website nasalies.org. It's Brother Ernest. He believes that there's not really much he doesn't believe, but he will be having a conversation with Reds this Saturday. So Reds and Brother Ernest will be on this Saturday's Saturday Night Fight. So look for that. And Brother Ernest is debuting a new shirt. He wanted me to let everybody know that he's got a new shirt design coming out. So you'll get to see it Saturday. Okay. And then last but not least, on Sunday, the 25th, we have the Golden Nuns, which is the choice for video of the year, creator of the year, animation of the year, all of that stuff. On Sunday night, that will be at 9 p.m. So come and see who wins, who you guys decided. Digital Hammurabi is up for 2 things in that category, and they're doing extremely well. Yeah, so you might want to stay tuned on Sunday. And I know you're last time I checked, you were killing it in the best non-sequitur best educator category. So if that trend continues,
well, nice.
Jake 3D says, F yes, non-sec, give me proof. Need a good case for God. Okay, maybe we can do that today. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and jump into what we've got happening tonight. We'll let these guys introduce themselves really quickly. If you don't know, I can't imagine that people watching now don't know who you are, Dr. Josh, but anyway, go ahead and give them a refresher, if you don't mind, sir.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on again. I'm Dr. Joshua Bowen from Digital Hammurabi, and my wife Megan and I, who is out in the living room, we run the channel Digital Hammurabi on YouTube. We have Twitter and other stuff. But we work in the ancient Near East, ancient Mesopotamia. I have a strong background in the Old Testament and Hebrew. So, we do a lot of stuff that interacts with the Bible and with the ancient world, and we try to make it understandable.
Cool.
No?
And Mischa Popoff.
Sorry, Megan just
How about
asked
letting
if I'm
everybody know?
clicking something.
What's that?
I guess they can hear clicking.
Oh, not. I don't hear anything.
Okay.
Steve, do you hear clicking?
Sorry.
Like a pen. Somebody said something like a pen. I don't have a pen, so I'm not clicking a pen.
Oh.
Hands up.
Hands up. Okay, Mr. Popoff, why don't you introduce yourself, sir,
Yeah.
and let everybody know how you found your way to NonSequitur.
Yeah, well, I'm a writer. I grew up on a organic grain farm in Saskatchewan. That's due north of Texas, 40 hours north. I now live down in Texas with my wife and 3 kids. And yeah, I do writing and public speaking. I have a bachelor's degree in the history of science from way up there. And I've reached my first half century on this planet. I'm now 51, and I've always been interested in the Bible, but became much more interested. And to my surprise, Texas really isn't the panacea for biblical study I thought it was. But that's beside the point. And nonetheless, I started writing more about the Bible. I used to write about agriculture. Even though I'm from Canada, I was a USDA organic farm inspector for 5 years. And that sort of got my feet planted on the ground here in America, and then eventually moved down here to Texas. And to make a long story short, came across these issues in the Bible in regards to salt, and salt being a very important substance back then and to this day. And I wrote an article, and I've been seeing if Christian sites were interested in it, and some are. I've had some good interviews, and I thought I'd broaden out a bit because, as I suggested to you guys before we went on air here, this is of interest I think will be of interest to anyone, whether they're Christian or not, whether they believe the Bible has any credence as a historical document or not, because we all agree, well, it was written, 1900 years ago or thereabouts. We're talking about the New Testament. So right there, if something is discovered, you now have to place it within that historical context. You can't say, well, that's a later discovery or something, as we'll see here.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get into the details when you're ready. But that's what brought me to you guys. Hopefully some healthy skepticism will rub off on me and maybe a bit on you. We'll see.
And that's why we brought Dr. Bowen here, because he's actually a biblical scholar and can better I think answer any questions you might have in terms of things that deal with what you're going to put forth, or he's able to kind of suss those out a little bit better than we are, because that's what he does. He's a biblical scholar, so I think it would be it's a really good kind of combo to have both of you here to speak to that. Just curious though, how did you find us?
Simple searching, watching videos, and saying, "Wow, looks like those guys might be a good place to try this out." And frankly, sort of that approach. I guess you're maybe familiar with the Hegelian philosophy that Karl Marx picked up on. It's the one thing Karl Marx got right, and that thesis versus antithesis yields a synthesis. And of course, he mucked it all up, and ended up a bunch of people have been murdered over the decades because of that. But that principle stands. I mean, I could spend all day talking to fellow Christians, and it's going to be great talking to the fellow Christian you have on here as a guest, certainly. But to get that thesis versus antithesis, to actually seek that out, I think that's something, frankly, people avoid these days. I mean, you were talking earlier, you're going to get this guy who thinks he's an angel of God. Well, great. If he's willing to come on this show, that's better than him going on any like-minded network where they're just going to sort of pat him on the head and say, "Yeah, good for you." I think politicians and academics have all abandoned that concept, that thesis versus antithesis. Even if it doesn't yield a synthesis, they've abandoned that. They're like, I don't want to talk to people who disagree with me, and that's what brings me here.
I think you're right. I think it's a good thing that people don't really do anymore, or they like to be stuck in their echo chambers. And to me, it's really refreshing when people are willing to like last night we had the guy that tells people to drink turpentine, and I'd spoken to him for probably 3 days prior to last night. He was wanting to come on to try to defend, him telling people to drink turpentine, because the guy's got 60,000 people that follow him, and that's a lot of people drinking turpentine. And when it came down to the show, he didn't show up, and so I went on and showed everybody where he confirmed it or whatever. But he released a video today talking about haters and all of this other kind of stuff, and he's just not willing to get outside of his comfort zone and be shown to possibly be wrong. So he didn't wind up coming on. But an interesting thing, I just want to throw this out there, and then Mischa, we're going to let you roll with what you've got to put forth today. But I got an interesting email today from someone big in the skeptic community, and he had watched the Sphinx episode that I did, and it's really cool. Michael, Michael Shermer. Everybody in here's heard of Michael Shermer, right?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, Dr. Bowen, have you heard of Michael Shermer?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He emailed me today. Bob is apparently really good friends with him, and sent him the email and said that it was had nothing but praise to say about. So I thought that was really cool that somebody like that was watching. But watching me get buried, essentially, watching my ass get handed to me over the Sphinx.
It's always enjoyable. Yeah, we all love that.
Yeah. Okay, all right, Mischa, why don't you take us through how important, or what you think is striking about the salt that is mentioned in the Bible, and how that correlates to where we are today.
Sure. Well, in the Old Testament, salt is always evil, and at best, it's a metaphor for something eternal. Like David's sons are said to have a covenant of salt. Salt being a metaphor that it lasts. It'll outlast everything. It causes things to last. It preserves things. So that's the best you get, is something like a metaphorical good thing. And other than that, it's neutral. There's reference to the salt sea. But most importantly, in the Old Testament, salt is evil. So you have Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. You have I think it's in the books of Judges, you have King Abimelech salting fields. And you don't even have to, you can look outside the Bible to see references to salting fields. That's something you do when you, if you're not going to occupy the land you've conquered yourself, you salt the fields to make them useless to your enemies, so that when they return, they nothing will grow. And by the way, the correlation nowadays is we use depleted uranium. Quite serious about that, by the way. Some people think I'm making a flippant joke, but yeah, I mean that's how you destroy a country. You render the land infertile forever. So that's salt in the Old Testament. It does rise above evil and becomes, as I say, maybe something neutral, and maybe even a reference, a metaphor to something good. But even in the reference of the covenant of salt that King David's sons supposedly had or did have with the Lord, the salt as a metaphor isn't like this fantastic thing, right? It's no one says King David or his sons are like salt. Right? It's just the covenant they have with God is a covenant of salt, meaning that it lasts forever. Well, in the New Testament, there's a shift, and of course it comes through the mouth of Jesus Christ, in that he actually says, you are the salt of the earth. And now David was never salt. The covenant he had with God was supposedly salt. But now there's Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount, and everyone refers to Matthew 5:13 for this, if anyone wants to follow along, but we're going to quickly depart from that. And that's sort of it. It's, you are the salt of the earth, and we should be, as Christians following Christ, we should be salt and light to the world. And if you just read Matthew and also Mark, that's as far as it goes. So you'll see bumper stickers and T-shirts, and it's in all sorts of sermons, that telling us to be salt and light because we are the salt of the earth. Now, being the salt of the earth, people just think, well, that's salt. That's common salt or table salt or sodium chloride. And again, the metaphor being, while it lasts, it preserves things that last forever. But we're going to turn to Luke now. And in Luke, in his coverage of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and by the way, John doesn't even cover the Sermon on the Mount, but he does cover this metaphor that we're about to get into. In Luke, he goes further. He says, ye are the salt of the earth. And if salt loses its savor, then it's good for nothing. So far, we have a sort of a parallel coverage in Luke that we saw in the most famous coverage of the Sermon on the Mount, being Matthew. But then Luke goes a step further and he says, for when the salt has lost its savor, it's no longer good for the land or the dunghill. Well, when would salt be good for the land? Never. So what is he referring to? And we'll just jump right into it with both feet. He's not referring to sodium chloride. He's referring to potassium nitrate, which was referred to since time immemorial as saltpeter, or commonly just salt. Now, in Hebrew and Greek, they only had one term, which was salt for all of these substances. Even sodium bicarbonate, which is a white powdery substance that comes out of the Nile, that was referred to as a salt for centuries. And some of the etymology is lost, but it looks like going back to the Hebrew, to my limited knowledge, perhaps your other guest will shed some more light on this, there was just one term, and it covered salt, common salt, saltpeter, which we knew existed back then, which was commonly confused with niter, which was the name they gave to sodium bicarbonate, which is just baking soda, basically, that comes out of the Nile. They got the name niter from the Nile, Ni being the first two letters. Turns out saltpeter doesn't come out of the Nile, and yet we went ahead, and today we now refer to saltpeter. It's a form of nitrogen, as I said, potassium nitrate. And now, of course, the most common form of nitrogen that we use is ammonium nitrate. But all throughout, whether we're in biblical times or in medieval times or in the Renaissance or right up to the present, this substance, which isn't a salt, even though it's referred to as a salt, it has two uses. One, it's the key ingredient in fertilizer. It's nitrogen that gives us the protein in our food. So even if you're eating a plant, all that, whatever protein is in it, if it's a low protein plant or a high protein plant like soy, the protein in it came from the nitrogen. And then of course you still need potassium and phosphorus to grow crops and a bunch of other trace minerals, but that doesn't matter. Without nitrogen, you'd have no protein. Your food would be just empty. The other use, of course, is for an explosive potassium nitrate or ammonium nitrate. Without the nitrogen, you get basically a matchstick. A matchstick just has sulfur in it. Or when you take 1 or 2 parts sulfur, put some charcoal in it, and then 6 parts saltpeter, that's the accelerant. It oxidizes the charcoal and the sulfur, and you go from getting a vehement flame, you go from that to getting an explosion that'll launch cannonballs or bullets out of guns. And so my contention is, because right there Jesus says, if salt loses its savor, it's no longer good for the land or the dunghill. My contention is, well, he couldn't have been referring to salt. We can just eliminate that because you don't put salt on the land or on a dunghill. And we can explain a little bit further. I think everyone gets the land part of it. You don't put salt on the land. You put saltpeter, which is a fertilizer, on the land. And again, we'll get into the dunghill if you'd like a bit further explanation on that, but I don't want to trip things up right now. So he's referring to saltpeter, and it fits because he says, when salt loses its savor, it's no longer good. Well, salt doesn't lose its flavor. In fact, going all through the Old Testament, as we just said, that was the only metaphor that wasn't evil. When salt is referenced in the Old Testament, it's as a permanent thing, like the covenant, God's covenant with David and his descendants. So this is a different type of salt. It's a salt that loses its flavor or savor, as it says in the King James. And guess what? Saltpeter, whether it's potassium nitrate or ammonium nitrate, it does lose its flavor. And by the way, it's not a flavor you want to try. It'll poison you, although it does appear in some foods, but it's in a different form. Still bad, as you know, nitrites can cause cancer, so don't mess with them. No one should try tasting it. But they used to taste these things, and all they knew was that it wasn't sweet, so they classified it as a salt. In any case, this is a salt, not really a salt, that does lose its flavor. Because what happens, where does all the nitrogen go? After it goes through the food cycle, through all the digestive systems of cows and sheep and chickens and humans, all the nitrogen, first it goes through the waterways, but all of it returns to the Earth's atmosphere. Sooner or later, it all returns. And the Earth's atmosphere, as probably a lot of you know, is 70% nitrogen. Turns out things like oxygen are really just small trace ingredients along with carbon dioxide. In any case, there you go. The Earth's atmosphere is 70% full of fertilizer and an explosive ingredient. So what this means is Jesus was referring to something that can, and we know does, lose its flavor. So that's the second piece of the first piece is you wouldn't put salt on the land or in a dunghill. Second piece is salt never loses its flavor. And if you were anyone reading their Bible would know that, but you'd also know that just from life experience. The third piece of the puzzle is all of them, even John, who doesn't really cover the Sermon on the Mount, they all refer to salt and light. So being the salt of the earth is one thing, but to be salt and light, how do you get that from common salt? Well, you don't, and that's why most people have just always assumed it was some kind of loose metaphor that Jesus was making, and that he meant two different things. He meant salt, common salt, and light. How they're related, they're not. People just assumed, well, as I say, it was some sort of loose metaphor. Well, if it's saltpeter, then it's one metaphor. It's a type of salt, what they referred to back then, and all up till the Renaissance, what they referred to as a species or a type of salt. And it does give light. It burns with vehemence, as early natural philosophers said. And it doesn't actually burn on its own. You need the sulfur and the charcoal there, but it's the oxidizing, and it provides oxygen to a flame to the point where it'll become an explosion. So all of those three pieces fit. And it fits with all four gospel accounts. As I say, even John, who didn't cover it, ends up using this metaphor of salt and light. So I think the Bible has more than one meaning. I think you can still use salt to convey some sort of spiritual meaning to guide people in their lives. But I'm embarrassed to say it took me about 30 years to figure this out. I was in a Bible study 30 years ago in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where I was first discussing this with a great pastor up there. And I just went away wondering, shaking, what did Jesus mean when he said, if salt loses its flavor? And yeah, well, when I turned 50, I think I finally figured it out. He wasn't referring to common salt. He was referring to saltpeter, the most important fertilizer and the key ingredient in gunpowder.
What is the significance of that? Like, what does that mean that when you say that you found the what Jesus was referring to when he said salt of the earth? Like, what are the, because he's not talking about table salt and he's talking about saltpeter. Well, what does that mean for everyone now? Like that, what's that? What are the implications of that?
Well, first of all, the metaphor now ties together. As I say, it's one metaphor. You're not supposed to mix metaphors, right? So it's not two. He's not making two metaphors. It's one. And of all people, again, even people who don't think Jesus is the Son of God, I mean, we're going to admit, the Muslims admit, he was a great prophet. He was a brilliant man. The accounts of him teaching the priests back in the temple when he was 9 years old. I mean, this guy knew his stuff. So he wouldn't mess things up. It would be us and perhaps his disciples who might mix things up a bit. So that's the first thing. It ties together the metaphor. The second thing is if we believe Jesus knew the beginning from the end, that this really comes home to roost for Christians. Then he knew it was not only an important fertilizer that's good for the land and the dunghill. And again, we can explain the dunghill further if you'd like. But the land that he knows, this is the salt that's good for the land. That's not that other salt that King Abimelech put on the land of his enemies. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is since he knew the beginning from the end, he also knew the other use that saltpeter would have. And in fact, I argue in some upcoming articles that are a follow-up to this one, some people think saltpeter wasn't discovered until about the 13th or 14th century in China. But I've found research, Muslim scholars and Chinese scholars that say, no, we're looking at the 4th century BC for the first known instances of a saltpeter-like substance being used mainly in warfare, by the way, because again, even though Jesus knew this was the most important fertilizer, most farmers didn't know. Even to this present day, a lot of farmers don't know what they're doing. They're just doing it. So if you had a compost pile and you were composting manure, all you knew was that it worked. You didn't know that you were capturing this substance from the Earth's atmosphere through plants and feces, which would then compost into a usable nitrate that would be used on the land. In any case, so the upshot is Jesus knew this was a fertilizer, not a salt. And I say he also knew, as I think other ancients did at the time, that this was a weapon as well. Now, Jesus isn't going to have us go out and conquer anyone. So the obvious conclusion, again, even if you don't think he's the Son of God, the obvious conclusion for consistency within the words of Jesus is that he's talking about self-defense. He's talking about, not about attacking anyone. He's talking about self-defense. And that's certainly something that has come to pass, I would suggest.
Let me bring Dr. Bowen in here. Since you are a studier of or a scholar of the text, is there any light that you can shed on what's been said so far? Anything you want to add?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no question. There's no question that the biblical text, both in the Hebrew and the Greek, will oftentimes have a single word that refers to a myriad of things. So the word dog, for example, in the Old Testament in Hebrew, is the word for fish, but it just means fish, so it can refer to all kinds of things that swim in the water. So in that sense, you're absolutely right. They're going to use the word melach for salt in the Hebrew, and it's it can be fertilizer, it can be salt for food. It's similar to the Akkadian. Akkadian has a similar thing. And it's also true in the Greek in the New Testament. So halos is it's
Halas,
salt,
yes.
and it can show up as what you put on your food to give it taste. It can show up as fertilizer. It can show up as a number of things. So that being said, I think there are a couple of things that you'd have to wrestle with. And I kind of like to say things like that because I don't ever like to say, generally speaking, I don't like to say that's not right. But I feel like there are hurdles maybe that we'd have to overcome. So a couple of things. First, in the Luke passage, there are some problems with not taking it as edible salt. So the Greek word that's used there for tasteless is followed up, and I'm just looking at it here in the Greek, by the word, so that the text says, therefore salt is good, but even if salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? And the word seasoned there has to do with condiments. It has to do with food. It has to do with seasoning something to be eaten. It's the same word that's used in Mark 9, which again, the word there's a parallel there. Instead of saying, in Luke 14, where it says it's become tasteless, in Mark 9 it says, how will it be made salty again? So it's become unsalty, how will it be made salty again? So, I mean, I think there's a problem there because I think right off the bat, the text is indicating something that is edible. The other problem that I think that you have is in the Matthew. Let me just go to the Matthew. verse. It says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how will excuse me, how will it be made salty again?" Now, the Luke passage says that you would use it on the dunghill, right? This says it is good for nothing anymore.
Right? It's not good for the land or the dunghill. That's what Luke says. It's good for neither now. Right. We haven't explained the dunghill part of it yet.
Sorry, yeah. So you're exactly right. I mixed up the verses. So in Luke 14,
yeah,
you just go to it. Therefore, salt is good, but even if salt has become tasteless, how will it again be seasoned? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. So,
right.
In Matthew, sorry, and I've just so that everybody knows, I've just looked at this like today. Sorry, so forgive me for not being an expert on this. But Matthew 5:13 says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how will it be made salty again? It is good for nothing anymore, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." So,
yeah,
I guess part of the issue there are a couple things. One, we have very clear instances. The book of Job shows salt being used as something to make something salty. We have Sumerian proverbs that talk about salt being used. How does the proverb go? When you have bread, you don't have salt. When you have salt, you don't have bread. I can't remember it exactly, but I think that's what it is. So salt is used in the ancient world in this way, right? And I think you would agree with me on that. If we have then something here in Luke 14 that says a Greek word that's clearly talking about a condiment and something that's meant to make something salty as a condiment, I think it's difficult. To escape that rendering there. Now,
yeah, let's take that. Those three things you've thrown out, those are really good points. But as for seasoning, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say that gets us into the dunghill, because to this day, organic farmers season their compost. That it is called seasoning. And this goes back to time immemorial. The other term you might use, and it was not a term that existed at the time, is inoculate. So you inoculate a dung pile the same way you inoculate a batch of sourdough or a batch of yogurt. You take some of the previous batch, a little bit, and put it into the new one to ensure the proper bacterial growth. And so that gets us, as I said a couple of times, we get into everyone gets the land part of it, but the part of the dunghill is a little bit harder to understand unless you do proper composting. You don't just throw your compost out and let it just rot. It can rot the wrong way. So, as I say, to this day, organic farmers will inoculate, but the other term used was seasoned, because you are seasoning it. And you're seasoning it literally. If you had a plate of food, you'd sprinkle seasoning on it, salt. Well, if you have a dung pile and you have some pure saltpeter, guess what? It's like salt. You can put it in a salt shaker and shake it over your dung pile, and then you'd want to mix it in, of course. So just covering off the one of your 3 points, I just want to make sure people know that was the term and is still the term used. Seasoning, we just think is for food, but I mean, when they smelt steel, they'll season it with certain substances.
Yeah, so let's talk about that just so that we stay point for point here. So can you find me an example in an ancient text where it uses this Greek word to show covering a dung pile? And I'm not saying that you can't. I'm just saying that would be something that I'd want to look for. So, for example, saying that we can season something and tie it into inoculate in an English rendering, or that's fine. But in order to make your case strong, and again, I'm not saying that you can't, because I don't know. I haven't done the research on this. I'm just giving you what I get at first blush here. What I would want to see is this Greek word as seasoning, which is clearly for condiments in the text, being applied to putting it on a field. That's where you would want to, in my opinion, that's where you'd want to go with that.
Well, it's not where I want to go. It's where Jesus wants to go. I mean, why would he say when the salt loses its flavor, it's no longer good for the land or the dunghill? So he's the one saying, if it still has its flavor, it is good for the land and is good for the dunghill. And I would rest on that and that alone. I have done some etymological research. That's why I knew the two terms you used. The one I remember right now is halal for the Greek. And that's the only term they had for salt. There's actually 4 varieties of salt we know of in the Bible. Common salt, then the salt for cleansing, which is a lot of people think is the sodium bicarbonate, which when you mix it with vinegar effervesces, and that would clean garments. And then saltpeter. The other one, of course, is borax, and that was known since ancient times too. That's now a brand name, but borax is the name of a type of salt. So those are the 4 types we know existed in the Bible, and they were just all referred to as, whether it's Greek or the Hebrew. In the Greek, it's halal. That's the only term they had. But to answer your question, yeah, for looking for other examples, well, don't ask me, ask Jesus or Luke.
Well, I mean, I think
what then did he mean?
I think you'd have to have. Sorry, I think you'd have to have an example. See, what if you have a contentious passage like this, and you have other Greek texts from the 1st century, for example, that use this Greek word with respect to condiments going on to food, which is what we have. You can't, if so, that would leave there a natural reading of this Greek word, right, to season something, as far as food is concerned. So if you have examples of that coming into this passage, what you would need, and again, I'm not saying that you can't find it. I'm saying this is what I would do. Were I going to write a paper on this and present it, what I would want to do is go back to the Greek sources, in particular here, and find where this word to season is used in conjunction with land, is used in conjunction with a field or a dung pile. That would, in other words, then you would have a case to say, here's an example of, even though we have these 5 or 6 examples in ancient Greek writings talking about this verb referring to condiment usage, it's also a word that can be used to season, as you said, a field or a dung pile. That's what I would want to do. That's just where I would go.
But now seasoning, you keep saying condiments. Now condiments are not seasoning. Seasoning means salt. And by the way, I learned that watching Gordon Ramsay. I mean, he'll talk about spices and sauces, but seasoning is salt. And I don't pretend to have a lot of depth on that. I admit that. I learned that on the Food Channel. And that's what seasoning is. It is salt. And so if we agree that the 4 types of salt were referred to as salt, then we don't have to go and find instances of the term seasoning being used. That is the term they would use if that was the common way to refer to all these salts is just salt, then I guess they'd think they were seasoning a dung pile. And if they were using borax or sodium bicarbonate to clean clothes, I guess they'd think they were seasoning their clothes with it too. But now again,
so yeah, let's say
we fight to a draw on that. Well, then you tell me, what could Jesus possibly have meant when he said, when salt loses its savor, it's no longer good for the land? I mean, you can go with the dunghill too. There's no case where salt is good for the land or the dunghill. It's the opposite, even within a biblical context. But all beyond, salt is at best neutral and at worst is evil. So what else could he have meant?
Okay, a couple of things. One, we got to be careful when we use modern terms and ancient terms. So you can't, unfortunately, what I heard you doing was sort of mixing those, right? And you got to be careful not to do that. For example, there are a lot of legal terms. This happens an awful lot in biblical studies. There are legal terms like judgment that have meanings today, and we translate Greek words or Hebrew words as judgment because that's about as close as we can get. But because judgment has very specific meanings in certain contexts in English, we then try to read those specific meanings back into the ancient text. So we want to be careful not to do that.
Uh-huh.
So if seasoning has that meaning, you can't really read that back into the text. You have to let the text say what it says in its context. And what I'm saying is, in this particular case, the instances, and I can send them to you if you like. The instances show.
You're right. It's salt. Then what the hell is Jesus talking about? That's what I'm asking.
Okay, so that's one point. I want to caution you. Look, here's what I feel like my role is here. Right? I don't know this topic. I don't know it. So what I'm doing is I'm hearing what you're saying, and as a researcher, I'm saying to you, sort of what I do is build cases for things from the ancient world. This is what I do. So I'm not here to like lambaste you. I'm not here to say that you're wrong. Honestly, in a lot of ways, this isn't like crazy interesting to me. What I'm saying is, I feel like I've been asked here as sort of a way to, in a sense, help you, right? Because if you are here trying to defend this case, which I think is fantastic, then I feel like going through scrutiny is the way that you get to the other side where you've proven your case. So I forgot what my second point was because I said that.
Salt.
Yes, salt.
Like,
nope, I don't remember.
That's why you think about it. I just I'm still me personally. I'm still struggling to understand what the I don't mean this. I don't mean this derogatory in any way, shape, or form. This is just as me, somebody listening to the case. But so what is? How would you answer that question? Like, so what if Jesus was talking about some other different salt? What does that? What are the ramifications of that? If whether he meant this type of salt or that type of salt, what's the real world implications that this alters something that we need to know about? Otherwise, so what? So how would you answer that?
Okay, sure. Well, if you want to go with the standard historical view that saltpeter wasn't known until later, then Jesus is truly a prophet. I mean, he's predicting something. If you want to go with the alternative historical, it's currently an alternative view that saltpeter was known, as I suggested, as early as the 4th century BC, then he's revealing a secret. And it's a secret held probably by his people. And in an upcoming article, I plan to discuss the bringing down of the walls of Jericho. And we all know where the spies spent a few nights. They spent their time with the prostitute inside the wall. The walls were so big that people lived inside them. And if anyone knows what a sapper is, we still use sappers in the military today. Sappers would undermine walls, or in World War I, they would dig a trench under the enemy's lines and pack explosives in there and detonate them. That's sort of an underground military warfare. And yeah, I'm a Christian. I do not believe for a minute that sounding the trumpet on the 7th day brought the walls down. I'm sorry, I've had some arguments with fellow Christians whom I love dearly. And they really get mad at me when I suggest, no, that the Jews, I mean, if the Chinese had saltpeter in the 4th century BC, wouldn't the Jews have had it maybe in the 15th or 16th century or whenever? And so, yeah, to answer your question, he's either predicting the future or revealing a military secret. And only Luke nailed it. The other two, maybe they knew what he was doing and they were covering for him. And then, of course, the 3rd John doesn't even touch it. So you might wonder, well, this is the Sermon on the Mount. It didn't just become famous later. The Sermon on the Mount was probably his, next to feeding the multitudes, which he did twice. The Sermon on the Mount is his most important public oration. Why didn't John cover it? And well, maybe they knew, wow, Jesus is going a little too far here. And those are your two choices. And I don't pretend to know the answer. But he's either predicting the future or he's revealing a closely guarded military secret for which I believe there's evidence.
Well, there's Dr. Bowen, you I know that you're working on things now in terms of prophecy and that sort of thing. Is there any way to read into these passages as a cryptic prophecy or a military secret that he's putting out there?
Okay, I would say a couple of things about prophecy in both the Old and New Testaments is that they're not terribly shy about it. So, for example, when you read through the book of Daniel, particularly get into chapter 7, um, they're just very, very specific, right? This kingdom, this kingdom. Now, it's true that in apocalyptic literature, sometimes they'll just use kind of crazy beasts, like in Daniel. But let's go to a very specific prophecy, and actually, I'll be talking about this tomorrow night, so it's fresh in my mind. Something like Ezekiel 26, right? Ezekiel 26, where Ezekiel predicts or prophesies about the fall of Tyre. Right? It's very specific. It names the agent that the Lord will use, Nebuchadnezzar. It talks about the specific actions that he'll take, the order that it's going to go in, and the ultimate demise of the city. It's going to be scraped clean. The waters are going to come up over it. So they're not terribly shy, generally speaking, about prophecies. Now you could look at something like Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22, where I still think that they're attempting to show something with some specificity, and you can see it. For example, Isaiah 53 is the fourth servant song, and this messianic figure that represents the nation of Israel is prophesied to bear the guilt, be the guilt offering for the nation of Israel, and to bear their sin. Now, the New Testament, when the New Testament writers refer back to these prophecies that can be somewhat more vague, like Psalm 22, for example, which is pretty vague, they will specifically apply them, right, to a particular instance. What I don't see I guess what I would want to do, having said all that, again, if I were writing a paper defending this, what I would want to do is show other examples of, ideally Jesus, but any of the New Testament authors giving what are clearly prophecies that really have no specific prophetic content. And what I mean by that is, Jesus saying, "You are the salt of the earth," if that's referring to gunpowder, or something akin to that. I don't know a lot about chemistry. Sorry.
Well, protein. It's referring to protein, because without nitrogen or nitrate, yeah. Well, no, then okay, it's also the key ingredient. And yeah, when he says salt of the earth, that's protein. When he says salt and light, I'm proposing that's gunpowder. Yeah. So salt of the earth, that still doesn't make sense as salt, but as saltpeter, yeah, you're the salt of the earth because you're alive and you have muscle tissue, and all the protein in your diet and all the protein in your body came from nitrogen. That's what I think he's referring to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would want to find other examples where, because I think that you would say that that's very obtuse, right? That's very, if you read, for example, some of the prophecies in Revelation. Prophecies in Revelation is apocalyptic literature. So I don't want to say strictly prophecy, but this sort of apocalyptic literature and keep things secret, keep things held. They're very bizarre in some cases, right? But they're intending to put forth meaning, and I think it's clear to the reader that even though this symbolism is very strange at times, something that has 7 eyes and 7 horns or something, it's clearly intending something specific. Whereas I would say that, and so then if you come to something like Luke 14 or Matthew 5, and you're trying to make that argument, what I would want to see as a critical reader, what I would want to see is a parallel, something that's parallel, that is clear, right? We can definitely say that even though this is spoken very mysteriously and you wouldn't pick up on it in any way naturally, we clearly see that he's intending something. Authorial intent is very, very difficult to get at. It's very difficult to get at. And so I think that's what I'd want to see.
Where does the gunpowder come into play? Like, how do you get gunpowder out of that verse?
Well, when he says salt and light, but first of all, because that's, as I say, that's one metaphor instead of two. Salt and light, if it's saltpeter, then yeah, it's just one metaphor instead of common salt and light, which are totally unrelated. So how you get that, though, is even before that, you get that because if this is the type of salt that's good for the land and for the dunghill, then it is also going to be, or perhaps by that time already is, the key ingredient in an explosive, in gunpowder. It is. So I really believe saltpeter was known, gunpowder containing saltpeter was known before Christ. And I keep going with two trains of thought. If someone wants to stick to the sort of the conventional theory that no, it wasn't discovered till the 13th century in China and then made its way to Europe by the 14th century, fine. Well then you've got a top ranked prophet on your hands there. But in any case, yeah, to answer your question, how you get gunpowder is if it's good for the land, it ain't salt, it's saltpeter, and saltpeter is good for the land, also the key ingredient in gunpowder.
Right, but my question is how you get from what it says to it being gunpowder. Like, what is the either the phrasing or terminology used or metaphor? How do you get that he's talking about specifically gunpowder just by the type of salt that's good for the land and good for the dunghill? That seems to be just right. Kind of almost pulled out of nowhere. So help me along in how you make that connection.
Well, because salt isn't good for the land or the dunghill. It would render it infertile, as we saw throughout the Old Testament. It's salt is a sign of infertility, tragedy, and disaster. And so after destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, everyone knows Lot's wife turned around to have a look, which was forbidden, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So that's not good. But the story of Sodom and Gomorrah continues later in the Bible. It's referred to in a later book. Sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's the reference is, if you keep this up, whatever is going on at the time in this book, you're going to end up like Sodom and Gomorrah, covered in nettles and stinking salt pits, something to that effect. So I mean, in the Old Testament, it's just bad stuff, and that is undoubtedly salt. But if for it to be good on the land, it's
well, let's say I grant you that. How do I get to gunpowder though? Like where do you get the gunpowder out of it? Like what's making you think that that's what he's referring to? With what you just said, none of that equals gunpowder to me. Like I don't see how you're pulling gunpowder out of that, and I'm trying to follow that line of thinking.
Well, I keep sticking with the first part because it's more important. If it's not salt, then it has to be a different type of salt, which would have been saltpeter, which is the key ingredient in gunpowder. Otherwise, as I said, you just have a match. Like a match head is just basically sulfur. It'll ignite and light, but it won't explode. And so nitrate is but then the next phrase, if you want to leap to it, is where Jesus says, and all four of them get this, all four of the gospel writers get this, they say to be salt and light. And that, if that is two substances, then it's a mixed metaphor, as I said, although I'm not gonna critique Jesus' grammar, but it just fits like a glove that it's one metaphor. Salt and light. Now, by the way, saltpeter on its own is inflammable. It's not flammable. You need salt. You need the sulfur and the charcoal, and then the saltpeter is the accelerant. It's kind of like putting yeast in dough. Like, you'll still have dough without yeast. You just won't rise. Well, that's what saltpeter does. It's the oxidizer that accelerates the chain reaction.
So are you saying that in that verse, light is gunpowder? That's what he's referring to. You're saying that the light that he mentions there, that's what the gunpowder is, because the light is actually like some type of explosion or a reaction to
literal light. That he's not. That it turns out he's not being metaphorical with either. That's saying be salt and light. He literally means to fill yourself with protein, grow crops, feed your kids, and carry on. You're not going to be of any use to anyone if you starve to death. You're certainly not going to spread the good news. But then to be salt and light, that perhaps you would defend yourself with the chemical formulation that you keep referring to, gunpowder. Yeah, that you would use that.
Okay, before we, I'm gonna go to Steve here in just a second for the chemistry aspect of it. But Dr. Bowen, is there anything that you take away from that verse when they mention light that is different, or how you read into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I know I kind of keep going back to, in order to prove the case, because I feel like that's useful to do. So the verse 5 is it 5:14, 5:13, 5:14.
5:13 in Matthew, yeah, and in Luke it's verse 14, I believe. 14.
Yeah, chapter 4.
Chapter 14.
But yeah, it's tough to keep all those things straight. I hear you. I guess so. In verse 14 of Matthew chapter 5, you are the light of the world, phosak to kasmu, and a city set on a hill, which is actually just sort of thinking about it here. This is sort of an ancient Near Eastern motif, but it follows with some more specificity. No man lights a lamp and puts it under a bushel or a barrel or something.
Right.
But
I think it's a bushel, because I
open.
remember the song, "The Hide It Under a Bushel."
That's right.
Remember that?
Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Don't light a candle and hide it under a bushel. Yes, and that, by the way, is literal light. That's being used in that metaphor. Yeah. But certainly not an explosive variety. You're right. But yeah, it's don't light a candle and hide it under a bushel. Isn't that it?
Yeah, I'm gonna let it shine.
Yeah.
I guess yeah.
All right. So I have I'll just read them just so that we can kind of see the context. So Matthew 5:13, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how will it be made salty again? It is good for nothing anymore, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do men light a lamp and put it under the peck measure. I love that. But on the lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. So then it switches. It's like it clearly makes it in my opinion, I would have to see evidence that this is not a metaphor. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That's these sort of you are and I am motifs that show up in the Gospels in particular are almost exclusively metaphorical. And so what I would want to see, and this is what I would shoot for, is trying to find places where what appear to be metaphorical are clearly not metaphorical. These are literal statements. I think these are things that you'd have to contend with here in this passage.
Yeah, and that takes us to Luke. See, I just think Matthew got it wrong or didn't understand fully. I think John did understand, which is why he didn't even go near it. And Mark, for his part, doesn't discuss. He sort of touches upon it, but not as much as Matthew and Luke. But yeah, you're right. I think Matthew. I think there's evidence that he didn't get it. A lot of Christians are mad at me for suggesting, because remember, the Gospels are supposed to be breathed out by God. Matthew just held the pen in his hand. He just happened to be the guy who was there to record God's word. I think he didn't understand what Jesus was saying. Luke did. Luke, there's no way salt is good for the land. And that's part of the article. I cover how many people have tried to explain this. And they're non-farmers, by the way, and they say, well, in ancient times, they used to put salt on a dunghill to, like you said, to season it. No, they didn't. They never did. No one's ever done that. And by the way, and then you get towering theologians, towering pastors like Francis Chan, whom I really respect. And he literally thinks it's salt. And he in his sermon on it, he pours salt onto a Bible, I guess, sort of thinking that you'll preserve the word. That's the metaphor. And then when it gets to the dunghill, he's saying, you're the dunghill, you and all of us, because we're worthless. And unless we get this right, we're just going to rot away like manure. And no, that's not what Jesus is saying at all. He's saying when salt loses its flavor, it's no longer good for the dunghill. On that note, also, you have to come back to losing its flavor. Remember, salt doesn't lose its flavor. That's why it's used as a metaphor for the covenant of salt that we hear in the Old Testament. Salt does not lose there's salt that's been around for, well, however long you think the earth is old. There's salt that's been around that long. Nitrogen disappears. It returns to the Earth's atmosphere. Nitrogen has a liquid, solid, and gaseous state on the Earth's surface. So it's trapped in the roots of legumes like peas and soy. It's trapped through mechanical means in synthetic ammonium nitrate fertilizer. And it's also available in liquid form as a fertilizer and as an explosive, powder and liquid. And then the most nitrogen you're ever going to find and could ever have found all throughout history is in the Earth's atmosphere. So there's the metaphor. How does salt lose its flavor? It doesn't. Saltpeter loses its flavor. It all returns from whence it came. All we're doing with farming is capturing nitrogen, which gives protein to food, without which you don't have food. And we capture it temporarily in our livestock and in our bodies. And then it all goes back. It loses its flavor. And if you have a compost pile and you leave it for too long, some people think the longer you leave it, the better. No. You're looking at maybe 120, 130 days if you're turning it properly, as you should. And if you inoculated it with a previous compost pile. And then after that, the nitrogen level starts to nosedive. And when you get to a year, some people for some reason have this stuck in their head that a year-old manure is really good for your garden. Well, yeah, it's going to be good soil when it's a year old, but it's not going to be a fertilizer. It's not going to have any nitrogen left in it at all. Most of it will have leached out into the ground below and gone through the waterway into the nearest stream and river. And some of it has evaporated. Sooner or later, all of it evaporates. And that's how the metaphor sticks for Luke and Matthew, really, because remember, Matthew says, if salt loses its flavor. By the way, then, when you do have a compost pile and it's lost its flavor, it's just dirt now. Well, what do? This brings us back to Matthew. It can be cast under men's feet. They would just use it for the streets of a town. They would just, it's better than walking on sand, I guess. They'd throw this useless over-composted compost down on the streets and to be trodden under men's feet.
So, Steve, I know you wanted to ask some questions about the chemistry aspect of it. It seems to all go back to shit eventually. It's pardon my French, but it's hinging on the dung pile, right?
Yeah,
that's a crude way to say it.
Yeah. Why would Jesus go there? Like, some people are so confused by that. Yeah, why would he mention dung? That's not holy and spiritual, but That's where it all goes. You're absolutely right.
Kind of shitty.
And then you start the cycle over again. Yep.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe we can walk it back a little bit, because I'm in the same boat here as a lot of people that are actually listening in. And I'm going to go back in my chemistry days, because it was not an area that I excelled in, although I did take basic chemistry. So hopefully we can maybe help people out, kind of suss out your argument, because I'm really kind of confused here. So maybe you can help me out. So a salt is basically just what you get when you mix an acid with a base, right? They neutralize each other and you're left with salt. So anything that you have that kind of equation, you're going to have some kind of salt. So potassium nitrate is literally just potassium mixed with nitrogen, NO3, right? So you have a anion and a cation. They come together, you have a salt. People in the live chat that know chemistry, please help me out here, because like I said, this is not my area. But not always do you have, I mean, you're talking about like potassium nitrate and gunpowder, which was, as far as I know, the Chinese discovered around 1000 something AD or something, right?
Yeah.
And potassium nitrate is not like the only thing used in matches. You can actually use like what's called potassium chlorate, which is very easy to make with potassium chloride and bleach. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I do know. But your argument is that Jesus is basically telling people about chemistry before they even knew what a salt was, what the chemistry was. Is that kind of what the argument is? That they knew that when they were referring to salt, like when they say the salt of the earth, when you salt the earth, as far as I remember, that basically meant to destroy the land, right? Because if you salt the land, nothing's going to grow there.
Yeah.
If you had potassium nitrate, that acts as a fertilizer, right? Because there's nitrogen, and that would actually benefit the land. So I'm trying to distinguish between when you're saying there's salt in the earth, or somehow it is either destroying the land or helping the dung. Can you kind of help us out, try to kind of understand where we're going with that? Because I think I'm in the same position as everybody else. I'm just confused, and I really want to understand this.
Well, again, now we get, was Jesus predicting something, as you said, China in 1000 AD? By the way, the common the convention, if you will, is like 14th century, or sorry, 13th century maybe in China, and then a century later, a century and a half later, it made its way to Europe. Now, you can go with that, and I believe everything in my argument sticks. So I don't even get into this in the article. But remember, what I'm suggesting is that he wasn't predicting something, he was revealing something. And you said something very key there. You said, this is very easy chemistry. And that's the argument made by some Muslim scholars. He said, why wouldn't they know? If they knew how to start a fire, if they knew how to smelt different types of metals and combine copper with, I don't know my metallurgy, but basically to get bronze as opposed to softer metals. So bronze created empires because they could beat their enemies. If they could do that, why wouldn't they understand the fundamental, like you said, it's basic chemistry. Why wouldn't they understand that? And the only question then becomes, well, wouldn't they keep it a secret? Wouldn't the powerful keep it a secret? And of course they would. And so you got the Jews walking around the promised land with their Ark of the Covenant. And some people we're really getting out there now, but really stick with me for a second. A lot of people hypothesize, well, there was something, maybe they had uranium in there. It was radioactive, because there's a story about some guy coming up and touching it and he dropped dead. Well, who knows? Maybe someone stabbed him in the back. That's probably a logical explanation.
Well, you're not going to drop
uranium.
Handling uranium. I worked around
right,
uranium.
not right away. Yeah.
Well,
even
actually,
if it's
purified. Yellow cake is harmless to hold. You can hold it indefinitely. It's an alpha. It's a beta emitter, so it's not going to really do anything to you.
Sure.
You don't want to eat it, but it's harmless.
I don't buy into that theory that the Jews had nuclear technology, but this is, people wonder what was in the Ark of the Covenant. Why was it brought to the walls of Jericho? Why was it trotted around the city as the Israelites marched around the city and sounded the trumpet on the seventh day? Well, it contained saltpeter. This was their military secret. This is how a small band of a 1 or 2 million people ended up becoming the richest empire in the world under King David and then his son Solomon. They were it. They were the Washington D.C. empire of their day. And I think what happened is they decided, it's too much work. The Romans figured this out too. It's too much work to rule over people. So let's just, play both sides against the middle. And that's indeed what the Jews ended up doing throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Is they had supply lines through the East India Company, both the Dutch East India and the English East India Companies, which ended up merging when they were all controlled by the Jews out of Amsterdam. And they used the slave labor in India and to a certain extent in China to sell saltpeter to both sides in any war, all the way up to and including the Second World War. So I think that's the history that we're dealing with. But going back to what you asked, how do we don't get gunpowder, we get the key ingredient in gunpowder. And how do we get that again? Yes, I should look into other references. It couldn't hurt. But how do we get that? It can't be salt. When Jesus says, when salt loses its favor, it's no longer good for the land. It can't be salt. And there is one other thing that is good for the land. There's one other one that's neutral. That would be sodium bicarbonate, which comes out of the Nile, as we mentioned. And that was used as a cleansing agent in the Bible. And it was called niter. And that's ironically where we get the modern term nitrogen. But no, Jesus wouldn't say that. Put something neutral on your land. No, he's, as you alluded to, he's referring to something that is good for the land until when? Until it loses its savor. And then it's no longer good for the land. And we know that's, again, as you said, that's basic chemistry. It's,
by the way, I just want to correct
convoluted.
Because I misspoke. Uranium-238 is actually an alpha emitter. I mean, not a beta emitter. So I misspoke there, and I wanted to correct myself because somebody with the nuclear field should know that. So uranium-238 actually alpha decays into thorium. So I like to be correct on that kind of stuff. So nobody noticed, but I did, and I went, wait a minute. So I had to correct.
Yeah.
Was that all you had?
So I think that was the secret that the Jews held, and I think Jesus revealed part of it.
Do you think they used gunpowder for like the wall of Jericho? Like you mentioned sappers, which was, if correct me if I'm wrong, was like the British troops. They would dig underground and then they would basically unstabilize the wall and the wall would fall, right?
Yeah. No, here's the thing. Okay. If you send sappers underground, these are not your slaves. These are not your cannon fodder. These are
troops.
Skilled. These are troops, and they're not your cannon fodder. The modern term, there's many modern terms. Navy SEALs, frogmen in the British Navy. I mean, these are your elite. Your sappers are your elite. Indeed, who does Joshua send? The spies he sends in, and they hang out with what's her name, Rahab, the prostitute, the Canaanite prostitute, inside the wall. Now, what are they doing? Just reporting back? Oh yeah, the Canaanites have this many men, and they're big. Well, they already know all that. What are these spies doing inside the wall? Well, they're sapping. Now, here's the key. If you just undermine a wall and keep digging until it collapses, what happens to your sappers? They die.
They die?
Trapped underground. Yeah. How do you get out of there? The only way to have effective sappers is to dig the hole and plant explosives and get the hell out of there and then light the fuse. If you just keep digging and you're under a castle wall, and you it's eventually going to collapse. It's going to collapse on top of you, and you're never going to be seen from again. What man in his right mind would want to become a sapper? So they had to have some mechanism. Now, some people have suggested for early forms of sap. Let's go to the medieval period to bring down a castle wall. You would dig a tunnel under the castle wall and then put beams in, and then pull the beams out from a safe distance back down the tunnel. Well, still, while you're digging, you're at great risk of this thing just collapsing on you. Who's going to do that? Well, it's dead easy if you have explosives. You just need to be under the wall. It doesn't have to be a big chamber you've carved out, just big enough for one man to pack explosives in there and then back out with the fuse. And that's how you bring down the walls of Jericho.
Would have been easier to use a claymore.
Dr. Bowen, do you want to speak? Do you want to speak to Jericho? Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Her house was on top of the wall, which was common enough in the time. So I think
it was inside. It's clear. She's inside the wall. But yeah,
Okay.
what are these spies doing there? Sorry to interrupt.
Hold on. So then she let them down by a rope, this is Joshua 2:15, through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall.
Well, she lets them out a window, so she's in the wall, not on top.
No, her
but even on top, these
guys
are there.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So I've always wondered what the spies did. The lesson.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Mischa, hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Were you finished with your thought, Dr. Bowen?
Oh yeah. No, I'm good.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mischa.
Well, okay. So the lesson of Joshua, if you read it superficially, and as you'll hear it in Sunday school, and as you'll hear it in any sermon, is to believe in God, to listen to Him. Don't doubt Him, because Joshua sent spies in, and the spies came back and said, "Man, those Canaanites are big. They're going to rip us up." But Joshua says, "No." Well, first he says, "I'm going to go away and pray," and he comes back and says, "No, we're doing this. God says we're doing this." And remember, Joshua had a vision. He meets, a lot of people say it's Jesus. He meets Jesus. And Jesus says, "Take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground." So this is what Joshua reports back, kind of like when Moses had reported back to his people that he had seen the divine, the deity. So he goes back and says, "We're going in. We got to listen to God. Tell me, why do you send spies in if God's got your back? Why do you send spies?" That's doubting God. That's double checking God. The spies were the sappers, and they were part of the plan right from the start. They knew that however they could contend with the Canaanites on a man-to-man basis in battle, nothing was going to happen until the walls came down. Now, by the way, the city, the circumference of the walls is like, I don't know, it's like a mile or more around. When we say the walls came down, a lot of people think, "Whoa, all the walls collapsed." No, it's a double wall, as in most cities that had walls. You don't just build one wall, it's a double wall. By the way, people lived in the wall. There were guards working in the wall. It's a double wall. So when they breached the wall, it might only have been, 25 yards, 50 yards wide. And that fits the text. The walls, plural, came tumbling down. No, not the walls surrounding the entire city. You don't need to do that. You just need to breach the wall. And since there were two walls, the text fits. It's the walls came tumbling down.
Does the text fit that neatly, Dr. Bowen?
Yeah, I'm actually just kind of looking through. So, I mean, sorry, I'm just looking through some of the Hebrew. It definitely uses. Sorry, it definitely uses a bait. So, yeah, I'm gonna say it could mean in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's just me. It may be just me, but I don't. With whatever salt that he's talking about using, or maybe it's maybe it is the gunpowder thing. How does this affect things? Like, what does this change from either a Christian's perspective? How does it alter your faith if you've believed it to mean that you're the actual salt of the earth? Like, what are the ramifications for the change that you see in this text? Like, how is that going to affect everybody's day to day, knowing that it means something different than what they thought before?
Well, the common assumption is that to be a good Christian, you're basically a pacifist. So, turn the other cheek. But as I remind my kids, you only have two cheeks. Jesus doesn't say just to keep letting someone slap you. And by the way, if someone slaps your face, when he refers to that, that's sort of a metaphor for, if it's an insult, you don't have to get into a big fight over it. Someone slaps your face, that's like calling you a name. Just turn the other cheek. Say, "Yeah, so what? So what if I'm ugly? Can't you do better than that? You know. And then same when he says to carry a Roman centurion's armor for him. He says the law of the day was if you met a Roman centurion walking the same way as you on a road, he could make you carry his armor, which was quite heavy, for 1 mile. Well, Jesus says carry it 2. He doesn't say carry it 3 or 4 or 5. So the limit here, the limit that I think a lot of people forget, and yet we trot off to war all the time and kill people, which is breaking the commandments. The limit is at self-defense. I think that's what Jesus is referring to. And then the other chapter from Luke that buttresses this is where he tells his disciples the night before he dies, he says, how many swords do we have? And this again is I think it's in Matthew and Luke, but Luke goes further with it. How many swords do we have? And he says, any of you that don't have a sword, take your scrip and your garment and sell it and get one. Now, elsewhere it says, he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. But living by the sword is being like a mercenary. You're living by your sword. But if you're just a common Joe, if you're a doctor like Luke was, or a tax collector like Matthew was, and you carry a sword, well, you're not living by the sword. That's self-defense. And the night before Jesus dies, he knows he's dying, but he doesn't want any of his disciples to die, because then the whole thing's over. The whole thing was for no reason. And so he tells them quite clearly, if you don't have a sword, now would be a good time to get one. And people have grappled with this. I've read so much on it and I've argued with some people. They say it's not a sword. Look at the translation. It's a knife. Okay, well, why does Jesus tell them to go get a knife? Why? So they can carve fruit while they're out spreading the good news? It's a sword, and we know that because then the following night, Peter he cuts a guard's ear off, which you can't do with a knife. You could do that with a sword, though, if you swipe it. And Jesus glues the guard's ear back on, and that's when he rebukes him and says, don't do that. If you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Because in that moment, Peter is trying to live by the sword, or more accurately, help Jesus live by the sword. Of course, Jesus knows he's going to die, but more to the point, that's not Peter's role at that point. The reason Peter needed a sword and Jesus had told him to get one was for later.
You're saying Jesus is instructing people to go out and be offensive.
Wait 1 second. I'm pretty sure you can cut somebody's ear off with a knife. I'm pretty sure that's a fact.
Yeah. You'd have to grab it though, right? You'd have to grab the ear and
not necessarily.
And then where's my ear?
Depends on the knife, I guess.
But
is that what you're saying? That Jesus is instructing people instead of just being defensive be pacifist?
Period.
Right. You're saying that instead of being a pacifist, though, he's instructing. These are ways that he's instructing people to be to fight back if provoked.
Yeah. They're going to be out spreading the word. We know Peter was attacked many times. He was attacked for spreading the word, but he was also just attacked. I mean, the disciples, they're out in no man's land, and there's highwaymen and vagabonds and all sorts of ne'er-do-wells. And Jesus knows it's going to be rough, and he knows they're going to face reprisals from the Jewish community. But again, he just knows it's not going to be pretty out there, and they should defend themselves.
So here's my question: if that's true, why does he use for where people get the passive answer? They get it out of turn the other cheek. This shouldn't be an eye for an eye. It's very clear, and you're able to take that takeaway is very evident from when he says turn the other cheek. That means don't fight back. Don't why would he use such? That saying the salt of the earth, that verse, it's very hard to parse out that he's telling you to be defensive, not passive. So where he's very clear and it's very simple in one, the other one takes some sussing out. If we're to go with your interpretation of it, why wouldn't he just be clear in if someone messes with you, you mess back? Like it seems too much of there's too many hoops to jump through to get the defensive line out of that. Just reading it offhand.
Yeah, I would agree that it's not, nothing is straightforward. That's why we have 4 gospel writers, for instance, to get it straight. So for the people who've criticized me for daring to suggest, as I said, that Matthew didn't quite get it right, even though he's my favorite gospel writer of the 4. For those people, I say, well, then if God just breathed it out perfectly, why do we have 4 gospels? And actually, we have 5 or 6. You start counting Paul's writings and Peter's and James. Why do we have all that? Why? I mean, you could lay out the Christian doctrine on 1 page of foolscap, couldn't you? And even if you wanted to complicate it with things that I'm throwing in, okay, 2 or 3 pages, 10 maybe. But we don't. We got a whole New Testament. And pretty clear from Jesus and Paul, we're not supposed to throw out the old one either. It's one contiguous Bible. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The thing is just clear cut. Hey Christians, defend yourselves. Don't take crap from anybody. Yeah, turn the other cheek. Don't needlessly engage in battles. But
why can't it be that simple, though, Mischa?
Yeah.
Why can't it be that simple? It seems like
I don't know.
That'd be the way to go.
That's a great question.
You want everybody on the same page, I think. Having to go through piles of shit and dung and all that stuff to figure out that he's telling you to fight back when provoked. I just think is there's just too many hoops that you have to jump through to get there. You know what I'm saying? Like it seems like that you can contort it enough to make it seem like it's saying that, but on its face, it's like you wouldn't get that out of it. Like you are maybe one of the few people that would come to that conclusion just reading that, because that's a lot of connections to come to that conclusion. Have you gotten any kind of what's the feedback been from fellow Christians or other people that you've kind of presented this to? What pastors and things like that? What do they say about what you put forth here?
The best feedback was from the editor of Culture Wars, Dr. E. Michael Jones, who's a Catholic. He's got many books under his belt, and he saw fit to publish it. So that was that plus my wife, who proofreads everything and has actually quashed a few articles. I used to write on all sorts of things, secular issues, farming, and she's changed sentences and paragraphs, and as I said, even quashed a few articles that were perhaps inappropriate. But yeah, Dr. E. Michael Jones went with it. And so that was pretty good. Beyond that, I have to say, I've received a lot of ambivalent or neutral feedback, and most of it is negative. Most of it is indeed negative. That, no, you're crazy. There's no way. But can I just add one thing? You're wondering, why is it so convoluted? I don't know. Why are there 66 books in the Bible written over 1,500 years? I don't know. You tell me. But can I say this? That for as convoluted as it is, the New Testament is way more straightforward than the Old. And I think the reason the Old Testament is more convoluted is because there's more cover-up going on. So frankly, as I'll discuss in a later article, there's a guy with my name, King Mischa, and his job was to give 100,000 rams and the wool from some 10,000 sheep to the Jewish kings every year to keep them off his back. And the way the story goes, he got fed up with paying them this annual tribute, which is basically a tax. Maybe it's interest on a loan, call it whatever you want, usury. King Mischa gets tired. This is in the book of Kings, I believe. He gets tired of this and he stands up to them. And so the Jews say, well, we got to go straighten him out. And they go to invade his kingdom. And when they come to his kingdom, they see he's standing on the wall of his city, and he murders his own son and then burns him on the wall. And this so frightened the Jews that they turned around and went back. Well, there's this thing called the Moabite stone, which was discovered in the 1800s, and no one denies its veracity. And it shows that, no, what King Mischa did is he went to a neighboring kingdom that was allied with the Jews, that wasn't paying them this horrible tribute, and he sacked them. He knocked the stuffing out of them. And that was why the Jews turned around and hightailed it. And they decided, let's just leave this King Mischa alone. Well, first of all, good for him. But second of all, Doesn't that fit better? The Moabite stone discovered 2,500 years later from when that book was written. See, the Jews are covering up when they write that he murdered his own son and cremated him on the wall of a city, which is really difficult to do, by the way. I mean, cremating a body, there's going to be a lot of wind up there on the wall, but that's beside the point. No, he didn't murder his own son. He murdered your ally in the area and proved his mettle, and you guys subsequently left him alone. So that's a cover-up.
Not true stories
that's
in the Bible.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. How do you? Yeah. How do you know the Moabite stone, which is a historical thing? I mean, they did discover that. How do you know it's not allegorical? And by the way, I like your version of Jesus better. I think that, I'll turn the other cheek a couple times, but if you keep messing with me, I'm going to cut you like a bitch. I think I like that version better.
Let me ask Dr. Bowen this before you answer that. Hold on 1 second, Mischa. With the story of since this is right up your alley, Dr. Bowen, do you have anything you can shed light on the Moabite situation where he talks about burning his son on the wall?
Yeah, I mean, so I've translated Mischa inscription, but so I guess what I would say when you come to royal inscriptions or inscriptions of any kind like that, sorry.
Please say take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, nice. Very nice.
Zinger.
That was very quick.
Thank
you. Ancient texts do things. And I think we need to realize that. It's very important in this discussion. So I think one of the things that bothers me about this is that this idea that these stories are convoluted or that the biblical text is convoluted. Actually, it's not, in my opinion. I feel like I have some standing to comment on it. It's actually very logical, the way the texts are put together. Now, the problem, of course, is that many of the genres that are used in biblical texts, particularly in the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament, are not genres that we have today, right? So, reading through something like Genesis 1, 2, we don't have a cosmological genre today, so that stuff doesn't make sense to us. So we read through the Psalms and we say, sure, we have poetry, so that stuff makes sense. Royal inscriptions are something that my wife deals with ad nauseum. She's writing her dissertation on it, and you have to be able to mine those texts in a way that is productive. But I think that coming back into this New Testament text and trying to make this argument that, and I'm getting a little more pointed now. I think there's a principle that we have to go with in ancient texts or in modern texts, really, and probably just in general principle. Things that are clear. If the text is clear in a particular place about a particular topic, and another text has to be, let's just say it, interpreted in a way that is very much against the grain, then we need to question, I think, pretty seriously, interpreting that text against the grain. So when I read, for example, from Matthew 5:38, the passage that we've been quoting sort of piecemeal, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist him who is evil, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. And whoever shall force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, in order that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes the sun, his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax gatherers do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what more do you do than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That text is very clear. Now, I'm not saying that I agree that that Jesus spoke those words. That's not what I'm saying. But stepping into that worldview and understanding the text as being the inspired word of God, that's very clear. And it bears out, right? When you look at the way that the disciples lived and died, they do so in a way that is not fighting back, right? I mean, I think that's the point of the text. When they're persecuted, when they're jailed, when they're imprisoned, they pray and they sing hymns. You know, they're not scheming of ways of fighting back. So I guess what I would say is, given the clarity that we have in these passages, both in the excuse me, in the descriptions of the way a disciple is to behave, and then watching them behave in just that manner, understanding that text, understanding a text that doesn't seem to have any bearing on this, and piecing it together in order to make it say just the opposite, I think. Well, I just think it's a difficult thing to do.
What do you say about that, Mischa?
Not the opposite, though. Yeah, not the opposite. No, good God, that's what people have been doing. Look at all the people who've died in all the wars, and look at all the people we've murdered. No, not the opposite. Not the opposite. To take that text and say, yeah, don't needlessly engage in any kind of violence. But I mean, who would deny the right to self-defense? I mean, sure, it's written in the Constitution, but it's kind of a pre-existing fundamental right. No one has the right to harm you or your family or invade your home. And by the way, that is clear in the Bible. We have property. We have.
Yeah, that's not what he's saying. That, like, because you brought up just a second ago that Jesus is using the salt example as a means to kind of encourage people to be defensive, right? And Dr. Bowen just read a verse that says the opposite. He's saying, you know, if someone wants your coat,
side note, Kyle, it's in this passage.
Yeah.
And so it's in the passage that we're talking about with salt is Matthew 5.
Okay, well,
even 20 verses later in Matthew 5.
Hold on one second, Mischa. Let me just get this out so everybody can understand. It's giving you examples of if you know, turn the other cheek. If you sue them for if you get sued for your shirt, to give them your coat. I mean, that's the complete opposite of defensive. That's being you know, overly, I guess the word would be submissive or something like that. Like you're offering more for them to.
No, the term you're looking for is diplomatic. It's being diplomatic. Why destroy your life and someone else's because they sued you, and you know, and you're going to give them your cloak or your shirt. Yeah, it's being diplomatic.
So the point is though, if he's telling you this specifically, like he's saying this is how you're supposed to be specifically, which is opposite of what you're saying in terms of being defensive. Like he's not telling them to be defensive at all. I mean, I don't get that out of that. Do you, Steve or Josh? I get a completely opposite of defensive, just to walk away almost, or you know, don't engage back. But so, and if that's how they live their life out, how do you kind of still come to that conclusion?
Well, because Jesus said you will suffer, but he didn't say you should. See, a lot of people go out now in medieval times. We had the flagellists, and those guys make themselves suffer. They would whip their own backs to be more close to what Jesus felt. You don't suffer, you shouldn't suffering. You should avoid suffering. You will suffer. The world will make you suffer if you're a good Christian. But you don't. There's no honor. You don't get into heaven because you suffered. It's a warning. Now you guys explain this. You're absolutely right. I mean, not all of the Bible is 100% consistent. Certainly not throughout the New Testament. Then what did Jesus mean when he said, "Take your cloak, the same cloak you're supposed to give away if you're sued, and sell it and buy a sword"? What's he talking about?
I think he's bipolar.
Okay, so
I can't get around it.
So let's deal with that, because I don't think there's a good answer, right?
I think there is. It's called self-defense.
Okay. So
Perfect.
let me just continue if I could. There's a reason that articles are written, scholarly articles are written on. I actually read one before we started here on that particular passage because it is difficult, right? And I think it would be silly to say that trying to this is the problem that I think that you're going to have to wrestle with here, and it seems like what you're doing. I feel like you're kind of wishing away, in a sense, what these something like Matthew chapter 5 is clearly saying, or something like Matthew 18, where Peter says, "How many times should I forgive my brother for wronging me? 7 times?" And he says, "No, I tell you, 70 times 7." So I think that and it's not just being diplomatic in Matthew 5. This is persecution that's being described. I mean, it's what it says. It's persecution. It's don't be afraid to loan people money that aren't going to pay you back. That's not diplomacy. It's being used.
Yeah.
But of course, this plays out, right? Paul says the same thing in 1 Corinthians. Don't go suing people. And the point, I think, is that tumultuous times are coming, right? And how does one in these tumultuous times? But this is apocalyptic genre, right? This is, you're going to go through hellish times. That's the point. You're going to go through these hellish times. You're going to suffer. You're probably going to die. Many of you are going to die. But there's hope, right? Because this is the messianic, just the apocalyptic genre, that hell is coming here on earth. But if you can, in fact, those that die inside that apocalyptic time, right? This time of great tribulation, those that suffer and die are the ones that are going to be honored the most. I mean, this is the apocalyptic genre. So I think trying to from, I want to say from logic, but from 21st century logic of how we interact in our legal system, to try to say, well, that must be there in the first century, I think is to put something back on the text in spite of what the text is saying. Now, I will say, and I'll stop with this, but I will say that Jesus' statement about buying a sword is difficult.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of things that we have to take into consideration. And again, I don't think this gives us an answer, but they have 2 swords, and he says it's enough, right? And then, of course, Peter draws the sword and goes to do this attack, and just what are you doing? So I mean, I think that the reason that so many articles have been written on this is because it's so difficult, right? And the reason it's so difficult is because Luke is so unbelievably clear. Matthew is so unbelievably clear about this. I don't want to say pacifistic, but yeah, I mean that's what it is. Don't fight back.
But you're confusing the two. Yes, you're right. Elsewhere, he said, "How many swords do we have?" And what do they say? We have one. He goes, "That's enough." He's saying in the other passage we're discussing, he says, "Whoever doesn't have a sword, go get one." Not difficult for self-defense, because what good is a disciple if he's dead?
And why didn't they do it? I mean, maybe that's my question. Why didn't they do it?
After him,
Yeah, why didn't they do it?
Well, how do we know they didn't? No one wrote about what. All we know is they all died, and they all died horribly except for John. We have no idea who they met with, who they spoke with, how many people they converted except for Paul. We know the churches he established. We don't know anything about any of them.
Okay, so let's take the Acts of the Apostles. Let's just take the book of Acts.
Hold on one second, Mischa.
Sorry, I feel like I'm...
Go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, I'm getting a little... So we have the Acts of the Apostles, which is exactly what this describes, right? This describes the apostles going out, being persecuted, right? The Apostle Paul is one that's doing it. Saul of Tarsus is doing the persecuting. He gets converted, and ultimately goes to his own death. So, I mean, I don't see the apostles fighting back. As a matter of fact, I see just the opposite. I see them undergoing this persecution, but continuing, because this is what apocalyptic genre calls for.
I would disagree. You're right. We say, You say you don't see them fighting back. You don't see them doing anything. We have no idea what any of them did except for Paul.
That's what the book of Acts is.
Okay. Well, the book of Acts is them getting ready. That's the huddle. That's them to get out there. Wait for the Holy Spirit, and they're all endowed. They have the flame over, and they speak in different tongues, and they spread out. And that's the last we hear of most of them.
Negative. Those are the first 2 chapters of the book of Acts. There's 28 chapters in the book of Acts that you're describing. Acts 1:8 through chapter 2. But no, the rest of the book of Acts is the Acts of the Apostles.
Right, and we start hearing new characters like Timothy and Barabbas. We don't hear what Matthew and only one we hear of is John, who went in the Isle of Patmos. We don't hear what any of them did, any of the 12 or 11.
Okay, I'm going to encourage you to read Acts. I would encourage you to read the book of Acts.
Who do we hear about? Who do we hear about from the disciples? Besides,
we hear about the
Paul
apostles.
Isn't a disciple.
I would just encourage you to read the book of Acts. Just read the book of Acts.
Okay, now Jesus didn't tell the apostles to get swords. Sure, he wouldn't have minded if they did, if you stick with my theory. But he told the disciples, whoever doesn't have a sword, get one. That's not difficult if it's self-defense. And we have no idea what any of them did. None.
I don't think we're going to... I don't think we're going to come to an agreement on this.
I'm asking.
Yeah.
Just give me a name.
I don't know what else to say.
Agree to disagree on it.
Comes up.
Who comes up?
Mischa, you're breaking up a little bit, so I think.
Sure. Can you still hear us? Yes,
I can hear you guys fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we're way over the hour and a half anyway. This flew by. Me and Steve just actually checked the time and realized that we've gone an hour and 45 or an hour and 50 almost. Sure. To be honest with you, I'm still just as confused as when I started. Like I see where I can see how you can, if you really stretch and try to make it fit, that it would, but it's just not something that comes out so clearly unless you actively work to make it fit in there. That's just my takeaway. People might, see differently, but it's just really hard for me to come to that conclusion just looking at it and with the other examples of like him instructing people to be sort of passive on how you should do it. I mean, honestly, I don't really buy into anything that the Bible says. That's just me. I don't. It's full of contradictions, and it's contradicting itself all over the place. So, I mean, this is just another example of another contradiction to add to the list. And if it is true with what you put forth, Steve, anything you want to add to what your takeaway is, or anything like that?
I just hope that all this talk about salt didn't make people bitter about it and leave them sour by watching this video.
Oh man, what a bunch of puns! What a bunch of puns! I like it. Okay, I already used my grain of salt pun. I had that one. I was going to use that one, but I've already used it, so I can't use it now. But I'm gonna let you guys kind of take a second and wrap up any last minute thoughts, your takeaways, that sort of thing, and then you can plug your channel or anything that you've got coming up, social media, all that stuff, and then we'll go to Steve to do the super chat. So, Mischa, do you want to go ahead and start us out and just kind of give us a closing statement, I guess?
A reprise. Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right. I mean, to connect all these things, I won't deny that it's not prima facie evidence. It's not just one page on foolscap. But to go back to Luke, there's no way Jesus is salt. Whether he is indeed talking about saltpeter, the key ingredient in gunpowder, debatable. But he is talking about saltpeter, the key fertilizer. There's no other way to interpret that. And that's really the nub of that article. And if people globbed onto that, I'd be happy. You can forget the rest. Going back to Jericho and then going forward, I suggest the disciples would naturally have defended themselves as best they could to help spread the word. That's all. I don't mind if people can't wrap their heads around that. I admit sometimes I can't either. But to read Luke, his passage on the Sermon on the Mount, there's no way he's referring to salt, and it seems he's referring at least to the key fertilizer that we've used since time immemorial and still used to this day, saltpeter.
Okay. All right. And Dr. Bowen, well, let me ask you this first, Mischa. Where can people find you to, like, if they, let's say they have any questions, anything like that they want to follow up with you with, where can they do that at?
Sure. Well, my old life was as a USDA organic inspector, and I have a website. It's isitorganic.ca. Of course, I was living in Canada at the time, even though I worked for the USDA. So it's .ca at the end of that. All one word, isitorganic.ca, and I've got a contact page there. So nothing there relates to this, although I have delved into biblical issues a few times in talks I've given and some articles, but no, that's just a good way to contact me.
Are you related to a man named Peter by any chance?
No. See,
okay.
In Russia, Popoff is like Jones. It's a common name. And no,
got it.
Peter, is he dead now? God rest his soul. Yeah, he wasn't.
No, he's still back. He's back
right.
at it. He's back at it again. Yeah, he's back on TV again.
Oh no!
In Australia,
oh boy,
actually,
those guys never died.
They put him back. They put him on TV in Australia. But what about does your family own a lucrative vodka line?
Yeah, vodka. That's the other one I get quite often. Again, it's a common name, and that one is spelled with a V at the end instead of two F's.
I have. I was getting ready to say. I blame.
Not very good.
If that was the case, I blame your family for many of strange wake ups. But since it's not you, then
yeah,
since we don't have to go into that. All right, Dr. Bowen, can you give us your takeaway and where people can digital Hammurabi and all that stuff? Shill.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you guys, Kyle and Steve, Mischa. I appreciate really all of this, and it's been a lot of fun. And I think the one thing that I want to say at the end of all of this is that the last thing on earth that I ever want to do, particularly given what Megan and I do, is try to hamper or put down somebody's drive to do research, right? And I really applaud, and I mean that wholeheartedly. I applaud the research that you're doing. I think it's difficult stuff to do. It takes a lot of thinking and trying to reason things, and I think that's fantastic. All that I would say is, moving forward, take seriously. I don't mean this in like a demeaning way. I mean this in an honest way. Take seriously the critique and the criticism and the suggestions of people that are in the field. So many people don't do that, and they just kind of keep going forward. And one of the things that can happen, and I've seen it, is that somebody might be going this direction with their research, and they take the advice and they steer just a little bit this way. They change something just a little bit, and they find that's the path forward. And it can be very similar to the path that you were going, but it just takes. But if you don't heed that suggestion or critique, and you just keep going this way, you may not find that path forward. Anyway, I appreciate what you're doing. I really, really do, and I honestly mean no disrespect by any of this. I think this has been great. So you can find our other to plug our channel shamelessly. You can find us at Digital Hammurabi on YouTube, and we do all kinds of ancient Near Eastern and biblical stuff. I'll be on our and Ra's channel tomorrow. It should be a lot of fun, and I'll be back here on Friday. So then that should be interesting. Should be an interesting time. So thank you guys.
Bring your game. Bring your game for.
Hey, God bless you.
For what's his name? Adonis.
Rael.
What is it?
Oh yeah, Angelus Domino.
And Angelus Domino.
Angel of
God. I can't wait for that. Steve, anything else you want to Oh yeah, you got super chats. Go ahead.
Just a couple super chats to get out of the way. Okay, so Jake 3D, $2. F yes, non-sec, give me proof, need a good case for God. Okay. Serbia again, sure. $2. You want to get a good case for God?
Mischa, just hang tight, man. These super chats get rough.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if that was good or bad.
No, they get rough. Just gotta roll the punches, man. Sometimes they target me and Steve. Sometimes they target stuff that has nothing to do with what we had in the show. You just gotta roll with them, man. But they pay to get them read, so we gotta read them. Go ahead, Steve.
You bet.
Serbia, $2. Excluding people, how does salt independently prove God? Again, Serbia, $2. Does Satan fall before or after creation? One more from Serbia.
After.
$2 after. After. Okay. Serbia, $2. Salt plus salt and light equals dualism minus spirit. Okay.
That makes sense, Mischa.
Does it make? Are you a dualist, Mischa?
Say it again.
You're salt and light equals dualism,
like
mind and spirit. But you do adhere to Hegelian dialectics, and you like Hegel.
I like that theory
Hegel,
of ideas, but yeah, Hegel was a rough guy. But she's saying duality is the two metaphors. That's the mixed metaphor that I'm rejecting, I think.
Yeah, Hegel didn't even like his own stuff. He was a very confused man. Okay, Justin James Human, $5. In Matthew, it says he cannot bring to peace to the world, but a sword, not a pacifist statement.
Again, a contradiction, though, because it completely contradicts what he said about turning the other cheek, and that's what I mean. Like, there's so many examples of him saying one thing and then turning around and doing the exact opposite of what he said before. I mean, it's just so like
he overturned the tables and the money changers, right? And he made a whip made of sticks,
right? If you want people to come to you, this is what I think ultimately disproves everything. If you ultimately want the most amount of people that you can get to come to you as a god or want them to worship you, you leave clear instructions and not instructions that are so open to interpretation or so contradictory that you break out into thousands of different sects of it. Methodists, Baptists, Catholics, Unitarian. It just, the list goes on and on. Why cause all that drama when you can just leave A, B, C, D, E in a pamphlet? It doesn't have to be a book. It doesn't have to be 66 books of the Bible. It can be a pamphlet, like a tract. This is how you get to heaven. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then close it. Boom, be done.
Well, God tried that with the 10 Commandments, and the Israelites couldn't follow it, so it's something different. And that would maybe imply that he's infallible.
Let's make it even worse.
Yeah.
Let's start with 10, but then we'll add 613 bits. Let's do it. Okay.
If you're God, I mean, you can leave a clear book. You know what I mean? Like, don't do this, step A, B, C, and D, and everything else is just so open to interpretation. Like right now, tonight we had a discussion on whether he was ultimately telling you to be defensive or be passive when confronted. And all of us are right, because we can all pull examples of where he's telling people to be defensive and where he's telling people to be passive. And it just doesn't make any sense to be so confusing. If you're God, you don't have to be that confusing. Like you would know what to say. Anyway, go ahead, Steve.
I am literally convinced that just about any argument when it comes to the Bible, you can find passages to support and passages to have evidence against. I mean,
yeah.
No question.
Dr. Bowen, would you agree that for most things that seems to be the case?
Absolutely. No question.
Okay, because I mean, and I think that leads to a lot of confusion, and I think that does lead to a lot of denominational things, because some people latch on to things that they like and go, okay, I'm going to take this, but I'm going to reject this, and the other people go, no, I'm going to take this and reject that, and that's how you end up with all these different denominations. But let's get through the last 2 super chats. Echidnu 5, thank you, my friend. By the way, I'm going to put a shout out to him. If you haven't watched Echidnu 5's videos, you're missing out.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're very good.
They're awesome,
and they're funny. They're hilarious.
Yeah, the dude is actually hilarious. I mean, I don't know why he doesn't have more subs. I think his stuff's a riot. He says, "You're a nice man without a doubt. Just wanted to say, I was older than you when I dropped this belief. Read the whole book from front to back. It might change your mind." I didn't think he was that old. Can you find that was a kid? Like in his 20s.
He doesn't sound that old.
No, he doesn't at all. Verisantium, $1. Thank you. Verataserum, I think that's how you pronounce it. Jake 3D again, $2. Gunpowder goes poof, but no poof in salt. Any salt. Okay. I think it's gunpowder more goes bang. It goes more poof if you add sugar to it. Sugar, if I remember, slows down the reaction or something, and basically that's how you make a smoke bomb or stink bomb.
There was one more that came in,
Saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, and sugar. And let's see, maybe refresh. Since there's any more that came in.
one more that came in.
That was the last one.
Well, the gunpowder goes poof, but no
I just read that.
proof
I just read that one.
in salt. Any salt? That's from Jake 3D.
Yeah,
He says gunpowder goes poof, but no proof in salt. Any salt.
Yeah, the one I just read.
Oh, did you?
Gunpowder.
Okay.
Yeah, Jake 3D $2. Gunpowder goes proof, but no proof in salt.
I was responding to responding to something in the chat and completely zoned out. Sorry about that. Well, Jake 3D, you got yours read 4 times. You got yours read 4 times. So
it's really
congrats.
good comment, Jake 3D.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you both for being here. Although like I said, I don't quite get the connection. It was an interesting conversation nonetheless to have, I think. And I think that it's, having these kind of conversations is important, even if we don't fully understand that particular side. At least we can try to walk away with, learning something new and getting a better feel for where people are coming from. It was certainly interesting, and I think you have to bend a lot to get there, but I can see, in an odd way, after you do all that bending, where you're coming from. But I just think it would be more simple, if it were supposed to mean that. It would be more straightforward. But that's just my personal opinion. There may be people that, this resonates with, and that's really what you're going for anyway. So thank you both for coming on and having an interesting talk. Tomorrow we have we do have Mischa coming back tomorrow. The other Mischa, Dr. Mischa.
See, I thought that, and I knew that too. That's why I was confused. I didn't know what was going on.
Yep,
she is coming back tomorrow.
That's actually Digital Hammurabi's competition in the Golden Nuns. Right now they're neck and neck. So we'll see how that turns out on Sunday. Yeah,
but awesome.
Yeah, whether it's actually going to be the duo. It's going to be Mischa and Jerry together coming to talk about heretics, throughout history. So it should be a really good a good thing. And then Wednesday we'll have Miles Powers for the Jilly Juice Protocol, and then we'll be off on Thursday. Actually, I say we're going to be off right now. I actually might do an impromptu stream. I was thinking about doing I make a killer dish for Thanksgiving, and you guys can let me know what you think about this idea. But I was thinking about going live and showing you guys how to make it. We'll put you in the kitchen with me, and I will go step by step on how to make this and we'll just talk food and that sort of thing. So if you think you might be interested in that, let me know, and I'll see if we can't make that happen. And then on Friday, Dr. Bowen will be back with us, as he said, to take on Lord Rael, Jesus incarnate. So, yeah, well, you know what? We can just ask him, Mischa. We'll just ask him what he meant when he's here on Friday, and I can get you a straight answer.
Get it right from the Jesus' mouth.
You should have interviewed him first. What were you guys thinking?
We should have just postponed this till Monday. That would have been could have gotten the answer.
Yeah. We'll just ask him. All right. Okay. I think that's all for that we've got.
One last minute super chat. Skeptic 77 $2. Thank you. And by the way, thank you. We just hit 17,000, and our goal is to get 20,000 by next year. So if everybody's listening in the future that is watching this video, share it. Help us out. You put it on Facebook, put it on G+, put it on, anywhere you have a social media, get these videos out, because I think that we're going to hit 20,000 by the end of this year. So does Kyle. That's our goal. Help us do that. We do appreciate it immensely, right? When you share these videos, it does make a difference, and we do appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you for this. 17,000 in
huge, right?
In 9 months is a little overwhelming. So we definitely thank you guys for watching. Except for you people that suck. You guys suck, and we don't thank you. But everybody else, we say thanks to. Yeah. And
they watched. They thumbs down, but they watched. So
that's fine. They still suck, though.
Yeah.
They still suck.
Saturday
we'll be with Brother Ernest, so that'll be awesome. He thinks that Bruce Lee was a hoax. Rags and I spoke to him on the Geek Room. It's fantastic. It's going to be great. So yeah, we'll see you. We'll see you guys back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern for the Griffiths, where we will be talking about heretics and closer to your goal. That's what we're going to sign off.
Well, we
with.
meant
Thank you, Paul.
It's not $20,000, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
20,000 earlier too, but yeah, we meant 20,000 subscribers, not $20,000.
I'll take 20,000 though. I mean, if you guys want to,
whatever.
That's a goal that
cool.
I'm fine with.
That's great. Sure.
Actually, let's switch it. We need 20 grand by Christmas. I like that idea better. So no pressure, guys.
I would buy myself a very good Christmas present, and pretty much everyone I knew, which is 3 people in real life.
No pressure.
So, yeah, no pressure.
So yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Good night.
Until then, take care of yourself. And
hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.